Thanks very much, and I hope you can all hear me well. This is a little bit of a weird silent disco setup that we're not super familiar with. But firstly, I want to thank AWS for having us here. But before I bring my guest on from Domain, Edwin, I want to talk a little bit about what Wiz is seeing in terms of what the kind of attack landscape's looking like, why we're focusing from an application view as the kind of initial priority, and why developers are the critical point in ensuring a reduction of risk within the cloud environment, and broadly for that matter. Now, firstly, for those that aren't familiar with Wiz, we've been around for about 5 years. We've got over 50% of the Fortune 100 as customers, as well as a lot of digital natives and startups. And kind of the key statistics or the key numbers that I like to highlight on this particular slide, outside of some of the local logos that you'll be familiar with, but is the actual volume of users that are non-security personas that actually use our platform. So over 50% of the people that log in on a day, week by week, month by month basis are actually not from the security organization. And this is a kind of good symbol or emblematic of the outcomes that you can actually deliver when you've got tangible and high value findings that are actually being shifted left to the end user. Now, firstly, attackers aren't viewing infrastructure the way infrastructure teams look at it. They're looking at the entire application lifecycle. They're looking at from build stage, code stage, the pipeline, and each of these particular parts of the application are all potential attack vectors. But secondary to that, the way the market and a lot of organizations, and perhaps yourselves, are working with it today, is we're looking at them in a vertical method. So you've got a different tool for different stages of the application. And the common thing that we're seeing from an attack perspective is it's very rarely a single point of failure, but it's a combination of issues. You could have a vulnerability in source that could be leveraged and exposed in the running infrastructure. You could have a public VM in AWS that's got a key that can be used by identity. It's very rarely a single finding. So you need to contextualize them to be able to appropriately prioritize and therefore be able to appropriately send to the end user to fix it in the right way. So as I mentioned, security tools are looked in silos. You've got a vulnerability and secret tool that's looking in your source code. Then you might have another thing for your guardrails in your CI/CD pipelines. Then you've got a different runtime security tool. And then essentially you've got these huge signals that are coming from all these different sources that aren't talking to each other. And although these findings may be legitimate to some extent, for those that aren't in a security role, as a developer, I'm sure you experience, or application owner or infrastructure team, is you get hit at every stage of your application with a different kind of set of rules or a different set of vulnerabilities. And you start to ask yourself, like, why am I listening to this one over the next one? Because when I deploy the application, I'm going to get hit with a new set of rules. And therefore, it's just like friction operationally, but also just like a lack of trust in the value of the findings. So the impact that we see here, as I mentioned earlier, security teams need to make sense of all this volume of alerts from different stages without the context of the application. They don't know the application as well as the application owner. And on the other side, you've got the application teams being sent like this plethora of alerts, and they can go quickly, well, that's not a function being called, or that's not a live application, and they lose trust with the security tools that are in their organization, and therefore they start to ignore it. They start to let that one slide. They want to deploy their features. They don't want to listen to this other random tool that's telling them that there's some CVE that's in a package that's not being called, for example. And as you'd expect, the lack of context introduces operational inefficiency, potential risk introduction, and friction organizationally between teams. So the change of approach that Wiz is trying to introduce for not just cloud security, but general application development is about, as you'd expect, making this horizontal. So the way at a high level Wiz works is we're throwing from code, pipeline, to runtime, all of the findings, are using the same engine, number one. So you don't have a different staging for, we've got the same scanners for each stage of the application. But more importantly, they come into the same data architecture. It's a graph database where we're able to attribute all of the different points and say, hey, this vulnerability or this secret in your source code, this one you probably want to look at because it's actually being used in a live application. And by the way, this live application actually has sensitive data flowing through it, or installed in it, or whatever it may be. And by providing these more pragmatic views, you're then able to really provide both the security team the appropriate context on how to prioritize, application or infrastructure teams the appropriate trust in focusing their time. If you're in development or application ownership, if you're spending time on security, you want to make sure it's having the most tangible reduction in risk. And you want to make sure it's really relevant. And security teams shouldn't necessarily be that bottleneck and just routing arbitrary CVEs to everyone. You've got these packaged issues that are trusted by the entire SDLC from a security perspective. And then the way Wiz has kind of been built is in this 3-pillar platform. So before I bring Edwin up, for those that aren't too familiar, we've got Wiz Cloud, which is an agentless first scanning of your entire cloud infrastructure. So think of AWS, it's about deploying a role and using the APIs of the cloud providers and essentially extracting the full inventory of not just the cloud services, but also what's running on the actual machines, whether it's a container, serverless function, or a generic VM. Wiz is able to bring in all the CVEs, secrets, misconfigurations, sensitive data, and we throw it all into this data lake, as I mentioned. It's a security graph built on AWS. And then we also were able to connect to code. So you've got this nice view of saying, okay, what is the entire SDLC risk posture here? What is actually building this application? And generally Wiz as a strategy, and we actually announced last week, the introduction of a service catalog as well. A lot of security tools are so infrastructure focused, they're not looking at how application teams actually look at their infrastructure. So by providing a service catalog, we can provide application teams your most risky service or most vulnerable service. We can show where it's potentially lacking some resiliency, a whole bunch of use cases there. And then we've got Wiz Defend, which is both coupled with our agent, which is a really lightweight sensor that essentially allows for 2 things. One, a similar challenge is in SOC teams today, where you're getting huge amounts of signals, whether it's from CloudTrail, GuardDuty, but also your EDRs and all these things, making sense of those and kind of bringing, once again, the noise from the trees type of conversation is how do you prioritize out of all these thousands of detections, which ones could be an imperative risk that is being realized and needs to be responded to. What Wiz Defend does is think of it as like a preprocessor of cloud signals coupled with Wiz Cloud. We already know how the entire infrastructure and application is set up, so we can actually tell, hey, this is a particular thing that's actually going to be leveraged and taken further. And Wiz Code, as I mentioned, is about protecting the SDLC, but also providing developers security tooling that's not just, once again, in their IDE telling them, hey, you got 1,000 CVEs. It's about providing them the list of CVEs and secrets relevant to what their running application's doing. And with that in mind, to have that pragmatic kind of self-service, would you please welcome along stage with me is Edwin Kwan, who's the head of product security at Domain, to share a little bit about this journey.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks very much for having me, Edwin. Please have a seat. Now, to start with, obviously many of you will be familiar with Domain, but I think it'd be best to hear from you. Tell us a bit about yourself and Domain.
Yeah, so I'll start with Domain Group. So Domain is an Australian property marketplace, and we've got a whole bunch of a portfolio of brands in there. So you're familiar with the domain.com brand, but there's other things in there too, such as All Homes, Commercial Real Estate, Price Finder, and Domain Insights. And all these solutions help our consumers, agents, and all parties with their property questions at every stage of the journey. And I just found this out, it's quite interesting. So every month for our digital offerings, we get about 7 million unique Australian visitors on there. So wow. It's quite a fair bit. About myself, so I look after product security. I've only joined Domain about just slightly over 6 months. And I look after all the areas that you kind of mentioned, from making sure that we write code securely to begin with, to make sure that there are no vulnerabilities, and to do it in a way which is streamlined into the development processes that the organization uses, to make sure there's no friction in there, because we're not meant to impede development.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's particularly with domain as a fast-moving application, its security is always going to be the potential handbrake that we need to do in a pragmatic way. But domain's been a recent adopter of Wiz for obvious full transparency. But Edwin, it'd be really interesting to hear your journey with Wiz, what attracted you to Wiz, and I suppose how's the journey been going so far?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just show of hands, who here has a vulnerability management program within your organization? And who here has no vulnerabilities at all within your organization? So that was one of the problems that we had with some of the tools that we use, right? Everybody, when you first start this journey, you put your tool on there and you get thousands of vulnerabilities. How do you go about to address that? So I think the most logical approach is to go by CV severity. You talk about that. Yeah. But it doesn't take into account where those systems are. So one of the things that the security team would struggle is you're going to try and talk to developers and you're going to try and convince them that, hey, you should fix this critical issue. And they're going to come back to you and say, wait a minute, this is all internal, it's test code, go away, don't waste our time.
Yeah.
So what I found is that for tools to be really effective, or to have an effective vulnerability management program, there are a few things that have to be in place. The first is that you have to integrate into your existing tool set, into all the languages, the build tools, everything that you have in there. It has to integrate and get the information out there. It has to be seamless to onboard. The second is the accuracy of the data. You don't want to tell people, hey, there's 500 critical issues for your team to fix. And they're going to go and triage it, and they're going to find, well, most of them are actually not that bad.
Yeah.
I find that you got 2 tries with the engineering team. The first time you share with them something that you think is important and it's not, they'll let it slip. They'll be like, all right, these things happen.
Yeah.
The second time, not really. After that, it's always back onto you. Show us why this is an issue. So being able to kind of shift from talking about vulnerabilities to talk about issues. This is what's in there. This is how it's exploitable. That's really important. And the last important thing is it has to be developer self-serve.
Okay.
Most organizations, domain being one of them, the ratios for the people in product security to devs is not that great. So we don't have enough people to kind of go through all the findings and kind of create issues for the developers. It has to be something that developers can get in there, it makes sense to them, they can get started straight away. So those are some of the things that were very important to us when we selected our tool.
And it'd be good to understand a little bit, just for everyone to kind of reference themselves, but talk us a little bit. Obviously, Domain's a very application-heavy organization, digital native, and talk us a little bit about the scale of the development team. What's it look like?
Yeah, so there's over 200 developers within Domain Group, and they are supporting over 30 systems that we have out there.
Yeah.
So I mentioned to you it's a portfolio of different brands in there. So it's not just the Domain app that you know.
Yeah.
There's all these other different tools in there. Some of they're all not from the same tech stack. Some of these are acquisitions, so they have the different tools that they have with them. So it's very diverse. I remember when I first joined Domain, I came from financial services, so I was brought in to kind of help with this AppSec journey, and I was going, all right, I know what to do. I got this playbook. I'll go in there. I'll get that done. And I remember looking at all how big the organization is. It's like, wait a minute, we need something else to help us on this journey.
Yeah.
So yeah,
absolutely. And with the self-service program that you were mentioning, there's kind of two things there, meeting them where they are in terms of their existing workflows, but obviously introducing a net new workflow to, particularly when it's security related. Talk us a little bit through that of not necessarily with Wiz, but of course if Wiz has been a part of that journey, what's the feedback been? How's that collaboration with security and those guys been?
Yeah, I think this is where we talk about that whole shift left, right? So you need to kind of make sure that information is timely for the developers in their development lifecycle in terms of when they make a change in the code. If there's an issue, give them that feedback there and then.
Okay.
So that was really important to kind of go, let's have that information surface to the development team as early as possible at whatever stage that is. That could be a PR check, that could be the CI/CD pipeline.
Yeah.
It could even be in the IDE, wherever that works. That would be fantastic. The other thing is that we have to integrate any findings or any issues that we have into the way they work. So if your team's working in Jira, you're using 2 weekly sprints, you want that workflow, all those findings to come into that process, not a separate thing that they have to look into to determine any kind of workflow in there. But yeah, I think self-service is really important. I'll share this onboarding journey that we went through. So when we got the tool in there, obviously we turned on all the integrations to get all the information in there. We ran a session with the organization just to kind of go, this is how the tool works, introduce the tool for the first time, getting them familiar with it. What was amazing is we haven't done anything in there, so there was no policies, nothing in there. We're just kind of going in a stage adoption.
Yeah.
There were teams that already started going in there, looking for the information, and they started fixing those issues straight away, without us mentioning anything. And I went in and I spoke to them like, oh, I noticed you fixed some stuff. And like, yeah, we went in there, we were curious to see what issues affected our applications that we're looking after.
Yeah.
And when they looked at it, there's this whole attack visualization. It just shows there's a vulnerability here, and this is the attack change. This is the exposure, like if it's an API, this is the API, and this is how it works. So I think it was relevant to them. They're kind of going, oh, okay, so if I can fix this, that addresses all that. And we had teams fixing it even before we went to that next stage. Yeah, so I think that's a good sign that that there is good developer self-serve and user experience there.
Fantastic, that's great to hear. And you mentioned like meeting them where they are from a Jira perspective and things like that. Broadly speaking, when it comes to automation, you obviously, and particularly in a competitive space that you guys are in as well, is like development velocity is always going to be, feature velocity is always going to be a kind of continue priority. How is security kind of come into that conversation more? Are you putting kind of hard guardrails initially? What's that journey looking like at the moment?
So we're early in our journey. I think what we have done so far is we started off with the awareness. This is why we're doing it. As a developer, you have a number of pressing concerns. You've got feature delivery, you've got other groups in there. Security is just one of the multiple things that's coming in. You've got business resilience, a whole bunch of people are in there, right? And the question is, why is this more important than all the other stuff? So the first thing was we talk about the why, and having that context was important. We don't talk about vulnerabilities anymore. We talk about issues, exploitable stuff in there. So we kind of emphasize, hey, it's not just a vulnerability. You can potentially exploit this, and this is the path. So that raises the importance, the why. This is why that's important. It's what we're fixing. And then we also went not just with the development team, and I guess this is still ongoing, talking to the product teams in terms of what does good look like. Putting in requirements in there. So this is still the journey we're going in terms of what is acceptable. We want to get to the point where we could say stuff like, you cannot go live, or you cannot go live without anything that is higher than a medium or so. So we want to kind of put that in there. But the other thing that we have is the automation into the Jira workflow. We've got what we call an SLO, a service level objective, where we say that depending on the criticality, there is a time frame where we would like that to get addressed. So if it's a critical issue, it's a critical issue that's exploitable. It's one of those things that, hey, if it's a 0 day, it's going to stop the work, get that fixed right now. If it's a high, we'll kind of say, hey, we know this is probably an interruption into your sprint or your iteration. That's coming in, you're doing 2-week sprint. We have a 4-week SLO for any highs. So that way, if you get it mid-sprint, you can kind of prioritize that. And this is also, I guess this in terms of the tooling, the raising that at as early as possible in your GitHub PR checks, and also with the Jiras. That is also done in conjunction with consultation with the development teams. And it all started with asking what is the best way to raise issues with you.
To work with you,
and for domain, you're like, hey, tell us early. The PR check is where we want to do that. Or if you discover that after the fact, the Jira coming in is how we want to approach that. So. Yeah, fantastic. An interesting stat that kind of we've gathered about your usage, and I'll be curious here. It's a bit of a potentially loaded question, but firstly, there's over 60 monthly active users or monthly active users from domain in Wiz today. So there's obviously that proactivity that you mentioned from your development community, and that self-service is obviously well and truly on the way.
what does that leave your team to do? What are you guys focusing? I mean, you mentioned governance and kind of setting up the SLAs, but what is that time freed up instead of being that router and distributor of alerts like I mentioned earlier? What does it allow you to focus on?
And that's a good question. So not having to be in the weeds of finding issues and talking to the teams, that kind of frees us up for some of the other stuff that is also quite important. So some of the things that we would do is if teams were to find a particular issue and they have some challenges with regards to how to address that, that's when they can talk to us. So we can provide that level of expertise to kind of work with them. So that area, vulnerability management is one of the areas that we deal with. There's a whole bunch of other areas there too. So we spend our time also kind of dealing with that. We've got an active bug bounty program, a responsible disclosure program. So we do get findings in there, and unfortunately, the tool that we use isn't as sophisticated as WIS, so there's a bit of manual triaging that happens in there to get that in. But this is what we want. We want to get to that level where it is seamless, where we're not there running the program, we're there to kind of add value add and kind of help with that whole, what else can we do to shift left?
Yeah, fantastic. And there's certain security like pure DevSecOps programs that are kind of being more and more popularized, particularly by AWS, which is like the security champions model, broadly speaking. Now, by the sound of it, as I mentioned, you've got a lot of developers now either proactively just sorting out their own issues in terms of their access to Wiz, but are you finding that there's certain individuals in those teams showing an interest in becoming more upskilled, or like are you finding embedded engineers that are partially as an extracurricular looking at security? Or what's the culture looking like in general, I suppose? We
definitely do have that. We are, and this was one of those people that discovered when we did that Wiz showcase, were the ones that kind of went in there and going, hey, let's fix all this. And we want to kind of leverage those particular individuals to kind of help uplift the security culture and the security posture within the organization itself. So we are starting out a program like that. We call it a security tribe because it's one tribe, one vibe. Everyone's all on this together.
Yeah, fantastic.
And what we kind of what we've been using that group for, or what we plan to use that group for, is to kind of use them as a consultation group for anything that we want to roll out within domain. It's really hard to engage over 200 developers and get their feedback. So we want to still do that large engagement, but to target those people in the security tribe. So your security champions, the people who are really enthusiastic, the ones who will be able to represent their team and kind of say things like, hey, this is actually how we operate, this particular initiative that you want to do, this approach might be better if you do it this other way. So we're taking approaches like that. We are engaging them to presenting any new findings. We're trying to put together domain's top 10, things that we're seeing in our organization early and often, and kind of using them to close that feedback loop within their teams and business units.
Oh, fantastic. And balancing innovation and maintaining the appropriate risk posture, and balancing innovation and security in general is always kind of a tough balance, I would say. Once again, domain is in a innovative space, heavy on data. I presume there's no talk that you can get away without saying AI, so I've said it. But I'm sure you guys are looking at AI applications and things like that. Could you talk to us a little bit about how does that balance being struck today? Where does the security come in as that kind of the seatbelt or handbrake, so to speak? How's that look? Yeah,
so I think it comes down to having those right guardrails in there. So the particular checks are all in there. I know we're looking at AI for code generation, or we're already doing that. And what I do find is that there's a lot of implicit trust in the code that's being generated. You're just kind of going up, this looks good, just commit that push right in there. But whatever code AI generates is probably from a whole bunch of existing code out there, which probably has some vulnerabilities in there too. So having the tool scan at as early as possible, like we say, help provides us that level of confidence to kind of going, are there any issues in there? And same goes for your open source components, right? Most of our systems, we don't write it ourselves anyways.
Of course, yeah.
We actually depend on developers that are probably across the globe, no idea what they're doing or what their capabilities are, or what their secure coding practices are. So we obviously need to have those guardrails in there to kind of say, these are the policies, lean heavily on the tools that we have to help identify any issues, and make sure we provide that early feedback to engineering teams for that. And it always comes back to the why. So we are kind of going, this is what it is, and we're not raising vulnerabilities, we're raising issues.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a language and culture change there as well. And how would you say from a maturity, it sounds like you guys are pretty well along the way, but for organizations that are potentially still speaking vulnerabilities, still trying to convince developers to fix things, what would you say are kind of like some of the fundamentals, foundations to get to that stage?
Well, we're definitely getting there in there. So we've kind of put together an application security framework. We're just at the end of benchmarking it. So I haven't got the results yet, but
sure.
I like to say that we are projecting really well, or on our way to get out there. I know we started on our journey on this pretty early, but the adoption has been phenomenal. We've been really happy with the level of engagement we're getting from the developers, which kind of tell us that what we're doing is working, so we're pretty happy with that.
Fantastic. I suppose just to kind of close things out and before I let you go, are there any kind of calls to actions, anything you kind of want to close on around what Domain's doing, what you're doing, or what you think the market should be looking at in general?
Yeah, and I want to say that, I'm not sure where the people in this group are from. Are you developers on security or whatever area in there? But when we come to security, always start with the why. Why are we doing this? Don't just say we're doing it because it's security. Why? Start with that, and then make sure you have the right controls or tools to provide you with that information. And what I want to finish off is with the right security program is one where it has a good integration with how you work. It integrates with that. It has the self-serve mechanisms, and I didn't talk about this other thing, but it's also fast in there. You don't want a vulnerability scanning tool that's gonna, double your build time. Yeah. Because people get frustrated very quickly, especially if they're in an agile environment where they're making lots of releases in there. Yeah.
Fantastic. Before we kind of close things out, for those that haven't accessed Wiz or used Wiz before, we do actually provide a kind of free hands-on lab environment where you can kind of join. We've got a bunch of sessions across Australia in essentially all the major cities where you can go on and actually do like a capture the flag style thing. So I'll leave that up there for a moment. It's an easy way to just play with the tool, and it's a bit of a competition as well with prizes and so forth where you can register online. So that's one way. If you just want to hear more about Wiz and you want to kind of think there's relevancy to your organization, obviously here's another QR code, but you request a demo. There's obviously the slides that I went through is very like high level conceptual around like the outcomes that we're delivering opposed to the actual technology. But hear why organizations like Domain have been able to realize some of these modern DevSecOps cultures and being able to move faster, but also securely. And with that, could I ask everyone to thank Edwin for joining me, and we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, that's cool.